Now let's look at the page where our transaction begins, the checkout page. Specifically, our transaction begins when we successfully submit a valid form. That is, a form that is valid according to both client-side and server-side validation checks. There are other elements on this page, but most of the interesting things that occur take place in the form. So let's concentrate on that. Let's look at the overall structure of the Checkout.JSP page. In general, there are four main sections of code in the Checkout.JSP page that are of interest to us. The first is the code section where we import our Jquery form validation libraries. The second is the JavaScript portion where we use the form validation libraries to write the rules for our form. After those sections, we have a table that contains the form itself. Inside the table, we have an error response section that is only visible if server-side validation encounters a problem. And finally, we have the HTML form itself. Let's go through each of these sections and look at the code. First, we'll look at the Jquery form validation library imports. There are two imports from this library. The first is the standard validation library. It includes validation for various inputs such as text fields, numbers, and emails. The second library has some additional methods. The one we are interested in from the second library is the credit card method. Before these imports will work, we have to download the files from the Jquery form validation plugin website and put them in a JS folder inside of our web directory. Of course, the form validation plugin cannot exist without Jquery itself, so we need to import this also. We're going to import Jquery in the header.jspf fragment. Instead of downloading the Jquery library, we're going to get it from Google. Jquery is common enough so that it no longer makes sense that every web server should deploy their own copy of it. So the imports are fairly easy. Now let's look at how we use these libraries. That involves both the HTML code for the form itself and some JavaScript code that references the elements in the form. Here's a portion of the JavaScript code. Even without seeing the HTML code for the form, you should be able to see what the rules property does. Note that the document ready line at the top is a Jquery idiom that ensures the document is fully loaded before the JavaScript function is run. The string #checkout form refers to the element ID of the form you want to validate. The rules property is a JavaScript object containing key value pairs. The keys correspond to the name properties, not the ID properties, but the name properties of the form's various input elements. Our form will have input elements with names name, email, phone, address, and credit card. Note that the name and address elements map to the string required. This means that the user is required to put something in these fields. As that is the only rule that applies to these fields, the keys can map directly to the required string. If there are other rules for a field, the keys must map to an object, as the email, phone, and credit card keys do. For example, the email key maps to an object containing two mappings. Required maps to true, and email maps to true. This means that the email field is required and that it must satisfy the rules for email that are built into the form validation plugin. Similarly, we can see that the phone number is required, must be a number, which means it cannot contain dashes, and has a minimum length of 9 digits. The credit card field is required and must satisfy the credit card rules.